I think we can declare that this week officially bridges the gap between Egghead and Elbaf. One thing I was going to say by the end of last year was that I strongly suspect that we should be in Elbaf around April, because that's when Usopp's birthday is. Oda sometimes does this weird thing where he has a chapter of pure setup where people are standing around or running around all over the place, but then he compensates for it in the next chapter where the pacing really picks up. Now there are two things that got me to think, like, why didn't this happen sooner? The first one is, like, why didn't Saturn stab Vegapunk last chapter? I mean, it's not like there was anybody there to protect him. At first, Sanji did tell Bonney that he was going to look into that, but then he had to go back and skywalk all the way up to shield Bonney from the lasers. And then the other thing is, why is Bonney barely being told now that she can control the Kuma pacifistas? I mean, I think the last one is a little bit more justifiable because Vegapunk is kind of a gray character. So I think him keeping that a secret for a while was probably him acting on behalf of his own self-preservation. But regardless, the whole thing with Bonney being able to take control over the pacifistas just in the nick of time does feel like a less offensive version of Momonosuke being able to conjure up dragon clouds to be able to save Onigashima. I also noticed that after Saturn stabs Vegapunk, he just kind of goes away, giving other characters time and space to get close to Vegapunk. Compare this to Akainu, where after he turns Ace into a donut, he notices that Ace is still alive, and so he's about to charge in with another attack, and Jinbei has to intervene, shortly followed by Marco and Vista. That's a great example of how you build tension, even after a character has taken a serious hit. Then again, getting stabbed in One Piece more often than not doesn't really mean anything anymore. Recently, the anime did a fantastic job at setting up the tone for the upcoming Law vs. Teach fight. They even gave the Blackbeard pirates a good old-fashioned pirate OST. It reminded me of something out of Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the thing about Teach's crew, is that whenever the Blackbeard pirates are on screen, they're pretty much the only crew, with the exception of maybe Shanks' crew a little bit too, that reminds me that conceptually, One Piece is supposed to be about pirates. There's so much wild stuff going on nowadays that it kind of makes it hard to remember that One Piece technically started out as a pirate manga. And so even though they're the antagonists, Teach's crew does serve to ground the story in that sense. Also, the preview for next week shows Teach using some kind of red lightning type hockey thing. And we also see Law with a little bit of red lightning as well. So I really wonder what that's going to turn out to be. Like, is that hockey? To avoid issues with copyright, obviously the brand of clothing that we see the crocodile wearing in the cover page is the One Piece World version of this brand right here. I'm sure you've seen polo shirts with the crocodile logo in real life. Speaking of stuff related to Robin, I thought it was important to figure out why/how she had gotten injured in the first place, to the point of it affecting her mobility. Because there was a time where we actually cut away from Egghead to see different events, like Kid being defeated by Shanks, the whole thing with Garp and Hashinosu, plus the stuff that happened at the Reverie. And so when we cut back to Egghead, Robin is already wounded. She's wearing some bandages and we don't know what happened to her. So I went back and pieced some things together, and it turns out that the last time that we see Robin before the story cuts away from Egghead, she's actually part of a trio along with Chopper and Atlas. And she's worried that something bad is going to happen to Vegapunk. After which Atlas remembers that there's an old lab in Egghead that isn't used anymore, and that she suspects that that's where Vegapunk could be. So Robin hears that and she tells Atlas to lead the way to the lab. And so upon further inspection, I found that the room that Atlas is referring to in that scene is actually the old Devil Fruit Research Lab, which is the same thing as the basement where Shaka finds Vegapunk and the Cypherpole agents being held captive by York. And since we know that Shaka ended up getting shot by York, it would follow that if Robin's group was headed in that direction, maybe the one responsible for Robin's injuries is York as well. I'm sure the anime or an SBS will fill in the blanks, or maybe we'll get like a little mini gray flashback from Robin's perspective at some point to illustrate the confrontation that took place. It gets me to wonder if the Seraphim might have been involved in that as well. Speaking of off-screening stuff, this sentence from Nami from the official translation caused Zoro to be the recipient of a lot of online slander recently, because Nami says Zoro is still being held up by Luchi, so Jinbei went to put a stop to that and keep him from getting lost. And I honestly thought that we would be getting an update in this chapter of the Zoro versus Luchi situation, and of course we don't. So just for the sake of being informative, I wanted to add in what Nami says in the official Spanish translation. So in Spanish, she says, Zoro is still busy with Luchi. Jinbei has gone to put an end to that. After all, Zoro does tend to get lost. So the difference is minimal, but I think what's being conveyed is that the fight needs to end as soon as possible, and Zoro needs to get back to the crew, because we're getting out of here. So in this time-sensitive context, Zoro has two things working against him. The first one is that he's up against unawakened Zoan, which are known for their durability and endurance, so that takes time, but then also Zoro gets lost. So by sending in Jinbei, you potentially deal with two issues at once. It's a no-brainer, like you save a whole bunch of time that way. Now something I had mentioned that I felt needed to happen that we we can now cross off the list, was for Bonney to be able to recognize Luffy as Nika. And not just her, but we also get a small panel of Kuma with a little spark effect coming from his head, signaling to me that something clicked for him at the sight or sound of Gear 5 as well. And so the connection I make is that just like we see the ancient giant reawakening due to the drums of liberation, I think it's very possible for something similar to happen here with Kuma as well, because he seems to be reacting to Nika in a similar fashion. It's kind of interesting how in this chapter we get a glimpse of Nika's influence over the giant people. Not only do we have Dory and Broggy show up by the end looking for him, but also the ancient giant is awakening, plus we know that Kuma, who is a buccaneer, was also stated to have the blood of the giants within him. Of course, we also know of the apology letter / poneglyph that Joy Boy left behind in Fishman Island, addressed to the mermaid princess, who just like Shirahoshi was also probably a giant mermaid. We also know that Joy Boy was friends with a giant elephant. So all of these connections just drive the point home that the giants played a huge role, or were a very important part of the ancient kingdom, which again is why I think Oda left Elbaf to be one of the last arcs of this story. Luffy using his awakening on the floor so that his friends bounce off of it unharmed, I thought was a really good application of his power. He also actually stretches his arm a long way as well to land that hit on Kizaru. And so with the Emperor and Egghead fully recovered, plus the Kuma pacifistas blowing up the marine ships on Bonney's behalf, plus the arrival of Dory and Broggy, it really does make it seem as if Luffy's side has gained the upper hand here. In addition, Bonney witnessing Nika's return could mean that her belief in him has officially been restored, and if that turns out to be the case, it's incredibly likely that she'll be able to use her distorted future powers to replicate Nika's ability once more. Also, if Bonney's authority applies to the Kuma Seraphim as well, then that means that she also has control over someone that can use the power of the Pawpaw Fruit. And so with all the previously mentioned forces working in Luffy's favor now, it feels like something pretty inconvenient needs to happen here for there to be a sense of danger. Because even Vegapunk admits that something like a Buster Call shouldn't be that big of a deal for somebody like Nika. I'm also kind of confused as to why it is that Saturn hasn't reactivated his paralysis ability. Is it because he can't? Is there a limitation to it? Like, does the pentagram have to be active or something for it to work? Or was Kuma's punch so strong that Saturn just completely forgot that he had that ability in the first place? Anyway, thankfully some Blackbeard pirates should be on the island already. I read some fans saying that it's likely that Katarina Devon has already shapeshifted and is already posing as someone else. Plus, given what Kizaru was about to do with his sword to Kuma and Bonney, it makes it less likely now that he'll switch sides. Something that I found was pretty ridiculous that I didn't notice until I read the official translation is how long it takes for Bonney's group, which is composed of Bonney, Atlas, Frankie, and Kuma, to fall to the ground. Because they started falling down last chapter, right? So just keep that in mind, because I'm going to show you everything that happens as they're falling down. So as they're falling down, Vegapunk contacts Atlas, and Atlas conveys the message to Bonney that she has the authority to control the Kuma pacifistas. Bonney then instructs the pacifistas to not shoot her group and to help them escape instead. So the pacifistas turn around and they start blasting the marine ships. Again, as the group is falling. There's also a brief exchange of words where two Marines kind of question whether they actually heard Bonney's voice or not. And then Vegapunk has this pretty substantial internal monologue about why he did what he did. Additionally, Vegapunk gets stabbed in the back by Saturn, and we see Bonney and Frankie reacting to that as well. Again, as the group is falling. Kizaru then shoots some lasers at the group. He flies up there with his sword and he says, "I'll cut you both in two. Don't worry, Bonney, it won't hurt." Bonney reacts to Kizaru's statement. She's like, "Kizaru!" After that, Luffy's hockey-embedded arm comes in to punch Kizaru away. And then a little bit afterwards, the group lands safely on the rubbery ground. So that's everything that happened as the group was falling. I mean, I guess if you wanted to justify it, you can just say that it's anime time and that sometimes scenes get stretched out, even in supposed moments of urgency. So there are moments where a real world time frame doesn't really apply, but I just wanted to share it in the hopes that maybe you would find it funny or amusing. Now, when it comes to the giants, we know that they were coming in from the northeast, which means that they were coming directly from Elbaf, because that's the direction that Vegapunk previously mentioned Elbaf is in. In the final spread, we get a glimpse of the giant warrior pirate flag, and to me, the stripes in the background of the flag represent the Atom Tree, because not only do they match the stripes that we've seen on the roots of the Eve tree, but they also match the stripes of a hidden structure that we see in this panel, where we see the island of Elbaf for the very first time as well. In addition, Vegapunk mentions in this chapter that a Buster Call is futile because there are people all over the world that have waited centuries for Nika's return. And we know, thanks to Linland's flashback, that the giants worship the sun. And so I'm curious, given that we saw Shanks and Elbaf recently, I wonder if Shanks was the one to alert the giants that Nika had returned, or if just looking at Luffy's bounty poster was enough for them to realize that. Because I do believe that Joy Boy entrusted the giants to protect the Atom Tree a very long time ago. So I wonder if the giants have like a secret torch or a sacred fire or something that lit up suddenly to announce Nika's return. Another interesting thing that I never thought up until now is that Dory is known as the Blue Ogre and Bragi is known as the Red Ogre. And so in Japanese, both of those nicknames or both of those epithets have the word Oni in them. And so one of the things that was briefly mentioned but wasn't really fully explored in Wano was Kaido's heritage in terms of the Oni race, right? Like, I wanted to learn more about Yamato and Kaido's backstory, not just like from a family standpoint, but also from like a lineage of like, okay, where does the Oni race fit in the family tree of the giants? So with the giants coming into the story, I think it's pretty likely that we'll get more info in regards to the Oni race as well. I know a lot of people were expecting the Straw Hat Grand Fleet to show up this week at Egghead as well. And even though I don't remember Harjunding being an Elbaf with Shanks and Dory and Bragi, or Oimo and Kashi, he is the leader of the new warrior giant pirates. Plus Shanks was talking about Bartolomeo messing with his territories recently. So I would not be surprised if the Straw Hat Grand Fleet finds itself getting pulled into the main storyline sooner rather than later. Now again, in Big Mom's flashback, we learned that the giants of Elbaf celebrate the Winter Solstice Festival, which celebrates the death and resurrection of the sun, which is essentially what ends up happening to Luffy in Wano, right? Where he dies, he is killed by Kaido, and then he comes back to life. Also, in opening 25 of the anime, there's a line that gets repeated, and to me that opening is kind of like a celebration of Luffy's awakening. And so the line is the one that goes, "The awakening moment, the time of resurrection has come now." The expectation of some kind of resurrection or the sun returning one day is also found in the lyrics of Bing Sake, specifically the part that says, "Waves are dancing, evening comes," which is another way of saying that darkness shows up. It's time to sound the drums, but steady men and never fear, tomorrow's skies are always clear, so pound your feet and clap your hands till sunny days return. So that's the belief that Vegapunk says that a bunch of people are holding on to in this chapter, the belief that eventually things are going to get better. It goes without saying that the belief of life after death is a common denominator among some of the world's biggest religions. So I'm sure Oda has drawn inspiration from that. As I wrote in the beginning, yesterday as I was editing this video, I was notified that I had lost a family member unexpectedly. It was one of my aunts who I grew up with and have very fond memories of. You know, one of the things that really stood out from her was that she didn't really need a whole lot to be happy. Like, she really enjoyed the simple things. You know, she was really joyful. Probably one of the most joyful people that I've met. I saw her during the holiday season. We were talking in the living room, just like normal, just like we always did. Nothing out of the ordinary. As she was leaving, I hugged her, and that was it. That was the last time I saw her. Reminds me of that line of like, life really is a fragile thing. So I want to dedicate this video to her, in her memory, and everything she did for me while I was growing up, and even after I was a full-grown adult. Thank you for watching, guys. Take care. Catch you guys later. Bye.